October 20th, 1944. Red Beach, Leyte Island, Philippines. The Pacific sun hangs low, casting long shadows across the wet sand. Landing craft growl in the shallows, disgorging waves of American soldiers, rifles raised, faces taut with the adrenaline of combat. Japanese resistance has already crumbled on this stretch of coast. The real fighting rages inland. But the beach is far from empty. Cameras click, flashbulbs pop in rapid succession. Signal Corps photographers kneel in the surf, lenses trained not on the advancing infantry, but on a single approaching craft. This is no spontaneous assault. This is theater. From the deck of the cruiser USS Nashville, a small landing craft detaches. It carries General Douglas MacArthur, Southwest Pacific Area Commander, self-styled liberator, and architect of his own legend. He stands erect at the bow, corncob pipe clamped between his teeth, gold-braided cap tilted just so, aviator sunglasses reflecting the glare. His khakis are pressed, his posture imperial. Flanking him, Philippine President Sergio Osmeña, looking somewhat bewildered, and a retinue of aides and embedded correspondents. The craft noses toward the beach. But it does not head for the practical pontoon pier constructed by Navy Seabees, a dry, efficient disembarkation point used by thousands of troops that morning. No. MacArthur gestures. The coxswain veers left toward open surf. The ramp drops too soon. Water surges in. The first attempt falters, awkward, undignified. The general steps down, stumbles slightly in the deeper swell. Not right. They back away, circle, reposition. Second take. This time the craft grounds perfectly in knee-deep water. MacArthur descends deliberately, trousers darkening as he wades ashore. The waves lap at his legs like supplicants. He pauses midway, turns to the microphones, and intones the words scripted in his mind for years. People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil. Soil consecrated in the blood of our two peoples. Flashbulbs erupt. The correspondents cheer. Osmeña follows meekly. MacArthur continues to the dry sand, shakes hands with waiting officers, and poses for more photographs. The moment is captured forever. The conquering hero striding from the sea, fulfilling a vow made in defeat. But this was not courage. Courage does not rehearse. Courage does not require witnesses, staged landings, or multiple attempts to get the lighting right. This was choreography, and everyone present knew it. The Signal Corps photographers had been briefed in advance. The correspondents invited aboard the Nashville understood their role. Record the return, amplify the drama. No one questioned the detour from the pier. No one noted the delay, while the general's staff ensured the water depth was theatrical, but not comical. No one reported that MacArthur had explicitly demanded the waiting shot, for the symbolism, for the front pages, for the immortality. Because by 1944, questioning Douglas MacArthur had become complicated. To understand why, we must peel back the illusion of that beach and expose what lay beneath. Not just one man's vanity, but an entire system's quiet surrender to it. The real story begins not in triumph on Leyte, but in humiliation 2.5 years earlier. It begins in the besieged tunnels of Corregidor, where a defeated general learned the first dangerous lesson. That popularity could shield him from accountability, that myth could outrun truth, and that those in power would rather indulge a hero than enforce discipline upon one. March 1942. The Rock, Corregidor Island, fortress guarding Manila Bay. Japanese shells rain down day and night. The air in Malinta Tunnel is thick with dust, sweat, and despair. American and Filipino troops on Bataan have surrendered after months of starvation and disease. Corregidor's garrison, cut off, outnumbered, low on everything, prepares for the inevitable. Inside the lateral tunnels, Douglas MacArthur paces. He has publicly vowed to fight to the end, to share the fate of his men. He has told aides he would rather die on Philippine soil than abandon it. But cables from Washington grow insistent. President Franklin D. Roosevelt orders him out. Escape to Australia. From there, direct the counteroffensive. The propaganda cost of his capture, paraded in Tokyo, perhaps executed, would be catastrophic. MacArthur resists. It will look like desertion, like I'm running while my men rot in prison camps. His chief of staff, Richard Sutherland, argues the strategic necessity. The president makes it personal. This is a direct order. Reluctantly, MacArthur complies. But on his terms. On the night of March 11th, 4 battered PT boats, commanded by the daringly Lieutenant John Bulkley, slip from Corregidor's battered docks. MacArthur, his wife Jean, their 4-year-old son Arthur, clutching a stuffed rabbit, a Chinese ama, and select staff endure a perilous 600-mile dash through Japanese-controlled waters. Stormy seas pitch the boats violently. Seasickness racks the passengers. Enemy destroyers prowl nearby. At one point, they evade detection by mere minutes. They reach Mindanao. Exhausted, MacArthur boards patched-up B-17s for the final leg to Australia. March 20, 1942. Tarrawee, South Australia, a dusty railway platform. Reporters swarm the arriving train, tipped off, of course. MacArthur steps down, scribbles a statement on the back of an envelope, and delivers it with theatrical gravity. The President of the United States ordered me to break through the Japanese lines and proceed from Australia to his country for the purpose, as I understand it, of organizing the American offensive against Japan, a primary object of which is the relief of the Philippines. I came through and I shall return. The White House had proposed "we shall return," collective, humble, unifying. MacArthur rejects the edit. It becomes I, singular, messianic. The phrase detonates across the world. In America, reeling from Pearl Harbor, Guam, Wake, the fall of Singapore, the public craves a hero who promises payback. Newspapers plaster "I shall return" in banner headlines. Editorial cartoons depict MacArthur as avenging angel. Radio broadcasters repeat it endlessly. Roosevelt, facing midterm elections and isolationist critics, awards MacArthur the Medal of Honor, the first father-son recipients in history, echoing his father's Civil War valor. Not primarily for defensive tactics, which had glaring errors. Aircraft destroyed on the ground hours after Pearl Harbor despite warnings, forces dispersed rather than concentrated, but for galvanizing public will. Behind closed doors in Washington, resentment festers. Navy Chief Admiral Ernest King fumes at MacArthur's flair for self-promotion, his habit of blaming the Navy for inadequate pre-war support. Army Chief George C. Marshall, ever restrained, privately notes MacArthur's communiques often exaggerate achievements while minimizing failures. Joint Chiefs meetings bristle with tension over strategy. MacArthur demands priority for his Southwest Pacific Theater, a direct return to the Philippines to redeem his pledge. The Navy pushes Nimitz's Central Pacific Drive, island hopping, bypassing fortresses. But publicly, crickets. Why the silence? The war is young and grim. Defeats dominate headlines, morale teeters. MacArthur's escape and vow provide rare light, a narrative of defiance amid retreat. To criticize him now would invite accusations of disunity, of undermining the war effort. Republicans already whisper of drafting him for president in 1944, a veiled threat. Roosevelt calculates coldly, confront him and risk headlines of infighting, risk fracturing alliances, risk losing public support. Better to accommodate, fund his theater, tolerate the myth. And in that accommodation, a pattern begins. MacArthur's headquarters in Brisbane, later Hollandia, becomes a court. He cultivates sympathetic journalists, feeds them exclusive stories. His communiques paint glowing portraits of progress, often inflating his role. Strategic leaks pressure Washington for more resources. Each tolerated excess teaches him something profound. The public is legitimacy. Perception is power. Authority flows not from the chain of command, but from admiration below. He does not see himself as rogue. He sees himself as indispensable, as history's instrument. By the time Leyte arrives, the lesson is internalized. The staged waiting is not aberration, it is culmination. The system has retreated before him repeatedly. Why would it stop now? Cameras fade on the beach. MacArthur moves inland. The war grinds on. But in the silence surrounding that choreographed return, something vital erodes. The conviction that rules bind everyone equally, that one man's popularity cannot override collective discipline. MacArthur didn't fear consequences, because he had already learned there were none. March 1942, Melbourne, Australia. The lobby of the Menzies Hotel buzzes with reporters, elect staff officers, and curious civilians. Douglas MacArthur has arrived, escaped from the jaws of defeat, bearer of a promise that has already begun to reshape the war's narrative. He steps into the press conference like a stage actor entering under spotlights. Tall, lean, theatrical in gesture. The corncob pipe is ever present, a prop that signals gravitas. Reporters lean forward. "I shall return." He repeats it slowly, letting each syllable land. The room erupts in applause. Cables flash the phrase across the Pacific and into every American home. Within days, "I shall return" is scrawled on barracks walls, printed on posters, whispered by Filipino guerrillas in the hills. The myth is born, not by accident, but by design. Back in Washington, the reaction is more complicated. In the White House map room, Franklin Roosevelt reads the morning clippings. He smiles thinly. The public loves it. Recruitment offices report surges. Isolationist newspapers that once mocked the administration now praise the fighting general. Good for morale. Good for the midterms. But Roosevelt knows MacArthur. He has known him since the First World War, when a young brigadier dazzled with flair and ambition. He knows the ego, the hunger for the spotlight. He knows that I was no slip of the tongue. He turns to his aide. "That son of a bitch is going to run against me in 44 if we don't watch him." Yet he does nothing to rein in the rhetoric. No quiet message through Marshall. No request to tone down the personal pronoun. Instead, the Medal of Honor is fast-tracked. The citation praises gallantry and intrepidity in the Philippines campaign, gliding over the fact that American air power was largely destroyed on the ground hours after Pearl Harbor, despite 9 hours of warning. Let the hero have his moment, Roosevelt reasons. The country needs heroes right now, more than it needs perfect accountability. And in that decision, the first brick is laid in a wall of immunity. Melbourne becomes MacArthur's new court. He establishes headquarters first at the Menzies, then in more formal offices. He surrounds himself with a loyal staff, many carried over from the Philippines, who call him the General in reverent tones. His communiques are masterpieces of self-regard, victories credited to his foresight, setbacks blamed on Washington's stinginess or the Navy's caution. Australian Prime Minister John Curtin, desperate for American protection against Japan, flatters him shamelessly. MacArthur accepts the adulation as his due. He begins to speak of the Southwest Pacific as his theater, the Philippines as his sacred obligation. Meanwhile, private resentment grows in other quarters. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, reads MacArthur's latest dispatch claiming credit for naval victories he barely influenced. King slams the folder down. That bastard thinks the Pacific is his private empire. King has no love for the Army in general, and none for MacArthur in particular. He remembers pre-war budget fights, MacArthur's lobbying for more Army air power at the Navy's expense, but King's rage finds no outlet. The Joint Chiefs are deadlocked on strategy. Navy wants to drive across the Central Pacific under Nimitz. MacArthur insists on a southern thrust through New Guinea to redeem his pledge. Resources are limited. Europe is still priority one. Every ship, plane, division allocated to one theater is denied to the other. MacArthur does not argue through official channels alone. He cultivates allies. He writes personal letters to influential Republicans in Congress. He grants exclusive interviews to sympathetic columnists, Westbrook Pegler, among others, who portray him as the victim of Washington bureaucracy and Roosevelt's supposed softness on the Pacific. Leaks appear in friendly papers, anonymous sources claiming the administration is abandoning the Philippines to appease Stalin or Churchill. The pressure works. Roosevelt, ever the political animal, feels the heat. Polls show MacArthur's popularity soaring. Republican leaders begin floating his name for 1944. A convention draft becomes a real possibility. The president summons George Marshall. "George, what do we do about our friend in Melbourne?" Marshall, the epitome of professional restraint, advises caution. "He's useful, Mr. President. His name keeps the Australians in the fight. The public believes in him. If we move against him now, the opposition will scream disunity." Roosevelt nods. He hates ceding ground, but he calculates the cost. An open rift could fracture Allied strategy. It could hand ammunition to isolationists who still want to pull out of Europe altogether. Wait, he decides. Win the war first, settle scores later. So the resources begin to flow south. More divisions. More aircraft. The Southwest Pacific gets its own air force, separate from Nimitz's carrier groups. MacArthur's campaign through New Guinea begins in earnest. Each concession teaches him more. He learns that strategic disagreement, if wrapped in the flag of public promise, will be tolerated. That media allies can pressure Washington more effectively than formal memoranda. That the threat of political ambition, never stated outright, always implied, can shift priorities. He learns that silence from the top is not disapproval. It is permission. In Brisbane, now headquarters, MacArthur pores over maps with his staff. He speaks of the Philippines in almost mystical terms, a personal debt, a moral imperative. His aides nod solemnly. Dissent is rare. Those who question too sharply are quietly sidelined. One evening, alone in his quarters, he gazes at a photograph of Corregidor's battered flag. They forced me to leave, but I will return. And when I do, the world will know it was my vision, my will, that made it possible. He does not think of himself as insubordinate. He thinks of himself as the only one who truly understands what is at stake. The public has anointed him. Newspapers echo his words. Crowds cheer his name. Washington's hesitation confirms it. He is indispensable. Rules are for ordinary commanders. He is the instrument of destiny. The pattern deepens. In 1943, as Allied victories mount, Guadalcanal secured, New Guinea grinding forward, MacArthur's communiques grow bolder. Every advance is framed as proof of his strategic genius. Casualties are downplayed, Japanese strength underestimated. His headquarters becomes a factory of optimism, feeding a press hungry for good news. When critics in Washington point out discrepancies, intelligence estimates that contradict his rosy assessments, no public correction follows. Marshall sends private rebukes through back channels. MacArthur responds with wounded dignity, hints of resignation, threats to tell the American people the truth. The threats work, the rebukes soften. Admiral King continues to fume in Joint Chiefs meetings, but his leverage is limited. Roosevelt needs Navy unity as much as Army cooperation. Confronting MacArthur directly risks a public explosion. Better to manage him, appease him, keep him focused on the enemy. And so the guardrails loosen further. Officers throughout the Pacific watch the dynamic. They see a theater commander who openly criticizes Washington, who leaks to the press, who demands resources with political blackmail, and suffers no consequence. Some admire him, many resent him. But all learn the same lesson. If you are popular enough, useful enough, visible enough, the normal rules of military discipline bend. The rot is subtle. It begins in headquarters briefings where candor gives way to flattery, in operational plans that prioritize symbolic objectives over optimal ones, in a growing sense that loyalty to the man matters more than loyalty to the chain of command. By early 1944, as plans solidify for the Philippines invasion, MacArthur's sense of immunity is complete. He believes the public's faith in him is a higher authority than any presidential directive. He believes headlines are more powerful than orders. He believes that as long as he delivers victories or the appearance of them, no one will dare touch him. And for years, no one does. The beaches of Leyte await. The cameras are ready. The script is written. In the space between admiration and accountability, MacArthur found freedom. 1943 to 1944, Hollandia, Dutch New Guinea. MacArthur's headquarters has moved forward again, leaping up the coast as his forces claw their way toward the Philippines. The bungalow is Spartan by civilian standards, but is the nerve center of an empire. Maps cover the walls. Staff officers come and go with the hushed reverence of courtiers. At the center sits the general, pipe in hand, dictating another communique. The language is florid, confident, absolute. Every Japanese stronghold is shattered, every advance decisive. Casualties are mentioned only in passing, and always framed as proof of enemy desperation. The communique will go out under his name alone. It will reach the press before it reaches Washington. This is no longer mere public relations. This is strategic blackmail. MacArthur has perfected a system. Friendly correspondents, hand-selected, often flown in on his personal aircraft, are given exclusive access. They dine with him, hear his version first, and cable stories that echo his narrative. Critical reporters find themselves sidelined, denied transport, or quietly shipped home. The result: a parallel information pipeline that bypasses the War Department. Headlines in Chicago, New York, and Sydney proclaim victories days before official Pentagon releases. The public believes MacArthur is winning the Pacific almost single-handedly. Washington reads the same papers and winces. In the Pentagon, George Marshall pores over intelligence summaries. The picture is far less rosy. Japanese garrisons bypassed in New Guinea remain active behind lines. Supply lines stretch dangerously thin. MacArthur's estimates of enemy strength are consistently low, dangerously so. Marshall drafts a sharp memorandum. Communiques must be cleared through the Joint Chiefs to ensure accuracy and avoid premature optimism. He sends it through channels. The response comes swiftly, not through channels, but through the press. A syndicated column appears. Anonymous sources close to MacArthur's headquarters claim Washington is muzzling the general, suppressing good news to protect bureaucratic favorites in the European theater. Another story hints that Roosevelt's Europe First policy is abandoning Pacific veterans to prolonged suffering. Congressional mailboxes fill with constituent letters. Republican senators demand investigations into censorship of military news. Roosevelt reads the clippings in the Oval Office. His jaw tightens. He's doing it again. The president knows the game. MacArthur is not merely informing the public, he is pressuring it. Every glowing dispatch is a subtle indictment of Washington's strategy. Every leak a reminder that the general has political options. Roosevelt summons Marshall and Admiral King. "How bad is it, George?" Marshall lays out the discrepancies calmly. Over-optimism risks operational surprise. Exaggerated claims erode credibility when setbacks inevitably come. And the leaks, classified details appearing in print, border on insubordination. King, never one to hide contempt, is blunter. The man's running his own foreign policy down there. If we let him keep this up, he'll have the country believing Nimitz and I are the obstacles to victory. Roosevelt listens, fingers drumming on the desk. He is a master of public opinion. He knows MacArthur's popularity is real, and fragile unity is the administration's greatest vulnerability. The 1944 election is months away. Thomas Dewey is waiting. Isolationists and America Firsters still lurk. Confrontation risks everything. Headlines of civil-military strife, accusations of jealousy, perhaps even a MacArthur resignation that would explode like a bomb. He could resign and run, Roosevelt thinks. And if he does, he takes half the Pacific vote with him. So he chooses paralysis. No public rebuke, no demand for pre-clearance of communiques. Instead, quiet instructions to the War Department: work around him. Accommodate where possible, keep the supplies flowing. Marshall obeys, but the cost gnaws at him. He writes in his private notes, "Tolerance of inaccuracy for political reasons undermines professional standards." The pattern escalates. In early 1944, as plans solidify for the invasion of the Philippines, MacArthur pushes hardest. He argues that bypassing the islands entirely, as some Navy planners suggest, would be moral betrayal. Filipinos would see it as abandonment. His pledge demands direct liberation. Privately, intelligence shows the Philippines are not strictly necessary for the final defeat of Japan. Nimitz's Central Pacific Drive is closing on the Marianas, bringing Tokyo within bomber range. But MacArthur frames the choice in emotional terms: honor versus expediency. He leaks again. Stories appear. MacArthur fights for Philippine redemption while admirals push bypass plan. Editorial cartoons depict him as the lone defender of American promises. Public opinion shifts. Letters flood Congress. "Keep faith with MacArthur" becomes a rallying cry. At the Quebec Conference in September 1944, Roosevelt and Churchill meet with the combined chiefs. The Philippines campaign is approved, essentially MacArthur's plan. Resources that might have accelerated the Central Pacific offensive are diverted south. Nimitz and his commanders accept it with professional grace. But in Navy wardrooms, bitterness lingers. One man, they mutter, has overridden the Joint Chiefs with newspaper clippings. MacArthur senses victory, not just strategic, but systemic. He has weaponized the press so effectively that challenging him now requires political capital no one is willing to spend. In his headquarters, he gathers his staff. "Gentlemen, the road to Manila is open. History will record that we kept faith." No one mentions the cost, the delayed end to the war, the additional casualties, the erosion of unified command. Dwight Eisenhower, then Supreme Commander in Europe, reads the Pacific dispatches from his London office. He has served under MacArthur years earlier in the Philippines, observed the flair, the loyalty demanded, the intolerance of dissent. He files the lessons away. Eisenhower understands something MacArthur does not. Popularity is a powerful shield, but it is not permanent. An authority that bends too often eventually breaks. But in 1944, the bending continues. Roosevelt campaigns for a fourth term. MacArthur's name is floated at the Republican convention, then withdrawn when Dewey secures the nomination. The general sends a carefully worded denial of political ambition, but the threat lingers. The president wins re-election handily. MacArthur cables congratulations, gracious, loyal, yet nothing changes. The communiques keep flowing, the leaks continue, the boundaries stretch further. In the Oval Office, Roosevelt confides to an aide late one night. "After the war, we'll have to deal with him. But not now, not while we're winning." Winning, he tells himself. But at what price? The price is the quiet corrosion of accountability. Every unchallenged manipulation teaches MacArthur, and every officer watching, that rules are negotiable if you control the narrative. That silence from the commander-in-chief is not restraint. It is surrender. By October 1944, the invasion fleet assembles for Leyte. MacArthur prepares his return, not just to the Philippines, but to the apex of his myth. The cameras are loaded, the correspondents briefed, the script rehearsed. No one in Washington objects. The war was still being fought overseas, but authority was already retreating at home. 1944 to 1950. The war ends, but the pattern does not. In the Pentagon corridors, officers whisper about the Pacific Campaign. They speak of brilliant maneuvers, yes, but also of operations shaped by one man's ego. Islands assaulted for symbolic value. Casualties accepted to fulfill a personal vow. Resources diverted because no one in authority said no. Yet no official reckoning comes. George C. Marshall, now Secretary of State, watches from a distance. He had borne the burden longest. As Army Chief of Staff, he had sent the private rebukes, the quiet pleas for restraint. He had absorbed MacArthur's wounded replies, the veiled threats of public resignation. He had argued in Joint Chiefs meetings for unified strategy, only to see political calculation override military logic. Marshall never raged publicly. He embodied restraint, the belief that professional duty required absorbing friction to keep the machine running. But in private memos and conversations with trusted aides, the toll is clear. "We tolerated too much," he confides to one. "We convinced ourselves it was for victory. But we weakened the very thing we were trying to preserve, the principle that no man stands above the system." Marshall pays a price. His reputation remains stainless, but he knows history will note the compromises. He knows that future generals will cite MacArthur as precedent. If he could bend the rules and emerge a hero, why not us? Across the Potomac in Navy headquarters, Admiral Ernest King retires embittered. King had never hidden his contempt. In meetings, he challenged MacArthur directly, called his plans reckless, his leaks dangerous, his self-promotion corrosive. But King had no leverage beyond blunt truth. Roosevelt needed Pacific unity. Marshall counseled patience. The president overruled confrontations. King's rage echoed in empty rooms, powerless against the calculus of popularity. King's staff remember the outbursts. Folders slammed, expletives muttered. One aide recalls him staring at a newspaper photo of MacArthur's Leyte waiting. "That peacocking son of a bitch got half my carriers diverted so he could play Caesar, and nobody stopped him." King dies in 1956, carrying the resentment to his grave. His memoirs are restrained, professional loyalty holds, but those who knew him understand he saw clearly what others excused, and his inability to stop it haunted him. In Tokyo, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers headquarters, MacArthur reigns like a proconsul. He drafts a new constitution for Japan, oversees land reform, purges militarists. Much of it is brilliant, transformative, even visionary. But the style is unchanged. He governs with theatrical flair. Communiques still bear his personal stamp. Dissenters are sidelined. The press is managed carefully. Favorable stories encouraged, critical ones starved of access. Washington watches warily. President Truman, now in office, inherits the problem. He has never liked MacArthur, considers him arrogant, politically ambitious, dangerously messianic. But the occupation is a success. Japan democratizes peacefully. Confrontation seems unnecessary. Truman's aides urge caution. "He's the most popular man in Asia, Mr. President, and half the Republicans still want him for 1948. Truman grunts. He remembers 1948, when MacArthur's name surfaced again in Republican primaries, only to fade. But the lesson lingers. The general's popularity is a political weapon. So silence continues. Dwight Eisenhower, back from Europe, observes it all. He has seen the dynamic up close. As a young officer in the 1930s, he served as MacArthur's aide in the Philippines, wrote speeches, managed correspondence, absorbed the daily lessons in power. He watched MacArthur demand absolute loyalty, cultivate media allies, treat criticism as betrayal. He saw how Washington bent rather than break him. Eisenhower files the observations away. When he becomes Army Chief of Staff after the war, he works to restore professional norms, emphasizes collective planning, discourages personal aggrandizement. But he does not move against MacArthur directly. Not yet, he thinks. The time isn't right. Eisenhower understands something profound. The danger is not just one man's ego. It is the precedent. Every unchallenged excess teaches the officer corps that popularity can override discipline, that political pressure can supplant military judgment, that silence from superiors is endorsement. In officers' clubs across the Army, younger men debate it quietly. Some admire MacArthur, the bold visionary who delivered victory. Others resent him, the prima donna who warped strategy for personal redemption. But all notice the same thing. No one paid a price for the indulgences. No courts-martial for leaks. No reassignments for insubordination. No public reprimands for manipulation. The message seeps downward. Discipline feels conditional. Loyalty to the institution begins to compete with loyalty to charismatic leaders. The idea of command as impersonal, rule-bound, equal begins to erode. Marshall sees it clearest. In retirement, he warns colleagues, we preserved short-term unity at the cost of long-term authority. When the next crisis comes, the system will be weaker for it. He is proven right sooner than anyone expects. June 1950. North Korean forces pour across the 38th parallel. South Korea reels. Truman commits American troops under United Nations banner. MacArthur, now commanding UN forces from Tokyo, takes charge. Early disasters. Task Force Smith shattered, perimeter shrinking to Pusan. But then Incheon, a brilliant amphibious envelopment, MacArthur's masterpiece. Seoul recaptured. North Koreans routed. Victory seems near. Truman flies to Wake Island for a conference. Cameras capture the handshake, Truman smiling tightly, MacArthur refusing to salute properly, arriving late in an open-collar shirt. The optics are deliberate. MacArthur signals, I am the victor here. You are the politician. Truman swallows the insult. The war is turning. No need for confrontation. But the pattern repeats. MacArthur pushes north of the 38th parallel. Against cautious advice from Washington, he issues public statements predicting victory by Christmas. He dismisses Chinese warnings as bluff. When Chinese forces intervene in massive numbers, the UN offensive collapses. Retreat becomes the longest in American history. MacArthur responds not with reflection, but with escalation. He calls publicly for bombing China, blockading its coast, even using atomic weapons. He leaks differences with Truman to the press. He writes letters to congressmen criticizing administration policy. Truman reads the latest communique, issued without clearance, and finally reaches the breaking point. His predecessors hesitated because confrontation risked elections, morale, unity. Truman hesitates no longer, but the hesitation of others has already done its damage. Marshall, now Secretary of Defense, advises Truman, relieve him. King is gone, but his old warnings echo. Eisenhower, NATO commander, supports the decision quietly. The officer corps is divided. Some see MacArthur as scapegoat. Others recognize the necessity. Yet all understand, the crisis was years in the making. Every tolerated leak in 1942-44, every accommodated demand, every silence in the face of manipulation had taught MacArthur one thing. The system would retreat before him. It taught the system something worse. That authority unenforced is authority surrendered. By refusing to challenge one man, they had weakened the meaning of command. April 11, 1951. The White House, Washington, D.C. Harry S. Truman sits alone at his desk in the Oval Office, the relief order already signed. The words are measured, almost clinical. General Douglas MacArthur is relieved of his commands in the Far East, effective immediately. Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway will assume responsibility. Truman stares at the document a long moment. This is not about anger, he will later tell aides. This is about containment. If we let one general dictate foreign policy through headlines, we no longer have civilian control. It is not anger, it is rupture. For years, others had convinced themselves that delay was wisdom. Roosevelt preserved unity. Marshall protected the war effort. Eisenhower waited for the right moment. Each calculated that confrontation carried greater risk than indulgence. Truman, the outsider from Missouri, the accidental president, sees it differently. He understands a truth his predecessors avoided. Authority unenforced ceases to exist. Korea has repeated the old pattern, only louder, more dangerous. After the Chinese intervention in November 1950, MacArthur's public statements grow increasingly defiant. He calls for expanding the war. Bomb bases in Manchuria, blockade China, unleash Chiang Kai-shek's forces from Formosa. He dismisses diplomatic efforts as appeasement. Washington urges restraint. Peace feelers are emerging through India and Sweden. Truman seeks a negotiated armistice near the 38th parallel. MacArthur undermines it openly. In March 1951, he issues a proclamation to the Chinese commander, offering surrender terms that include threats of massive retaliation. It is a direct intrusion into presidential prerogative. Truman's cabinet debates relief. Some urge caution. MacArthur remains immensely popular. Firing him will ignite a firestorm. But then comes the final straw. A letter MacArthur wrote to Republican House Minority Leader Joseph Martin, read aloud on the House floor. In it, MacArthur criticizes administration policy and endorses the idea of unleashing Asian forces against communist China. There is no substitute for victory. The letter is public defiance. It is the culmination of a decade of tolerated boundary testing. Truman acts. The announcement hits like thunder. Newspapers scream headlines: Truman fires MacArthur. Crowds gather in protest. Effigies of Truman burn in some cities. Republican senators demand impeachment. Editorial pages split. Some hail the president for upholding civilian supremacy. Others denounce him for cashiering America's greatest general. MacArthur returns home a martyr. Ticker tape parades in New York dwarf anything seen before. Millions line the streets. He addresses Congress. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. The chamber erupts in prolonged applause. Polls show overwhelming public support for MacArthur. For a moment it seems the old lesson holds. Popularity triumphs over authority. But this time the system does not retreat. Truman stands firm. He explains calmly in press conferences and fireside chats, the issue is not strategy alone, but who makes policy in a democracy. The president, not the general. The storm peaks, then slowly ebbs. Senate hearings follow. MacArthur testifies with theatrical flair, Ridgway and Marshall with quiet facts. Classified cables are revealed. MacArthur's repeated disregard for directives, his underestimation of Chinese strength, his unilateral communications. Public opinion shifts. The parades fade. MacArthur retires to the Waldorf Towers in New York, writing memoirs, advising corporations, watching his influence wane. He lives another 13 years but never holds command again. Truman leaves office in 1953 deeply unpopular. Korea unresolved, scandals swirling. History initially judges him harshly. But the principle endures. Civilian control of the military, shaken during World War II by hesitation, is reaffirmed by rupture. Future generals absorb the lesson, cross the line publicly, and even popularity has limits. The cost is revealing. MacArthur's fall exposes the truth. He was never untouchable by nature. He was made untouchable, step by step, by the accumulated hesitations of others. Roosevelt's tragic paradox, preserve unity now, enforce discipline later, became perpetual delay. Marshall's restraint became passive instruction. King's isolated rage became powerless truth. Eisenhower's watchful silence became preparation for his own presidency, where he would insist on impersonal command. Each paid a price. The system paid a greater one. Years of eroded guardrails, distorted strategy, quiet rot in the meaning of accountability. Truman accepted short-term chaos to preserve long-term authority. He absorbed the political cost so the Constitution would not. In the end, MacArthur's belief in his own immunity was not delusion. It was learned behavior. Every unchallenged communique, every accommodated leak, every silence in the face of manipulation taught him that the system would step aside. He believed he was the rule because, for years, everyone around him quietly agreed to treat him as one. The real danger was never Douglas MacArthur alone. It was what everyone else was willing to excuse in the name of pragmatism. It was the slow discovery that power grows exactly where accountability hesitates. Democracy does not fail in dramatic coups. It hesitates first, one concession at a time, until one day it must choose between confrontation and surrender. Truman chose confrontation, and in that choice he reminded the nation of a hard truth. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is instruction. MacArthur believed he was untouchable, because for years everyone taught him he was. If you believe history should expose power, not excuse it, subscribe for more untold truths.